Do you see anything wrong here? I don't really, and I haven't for years. Now, I realize I have a problem. And this problem, to a lot of people, is really hard to understand. I have this kettle, and I like this kettle. Today, in this video, we'll go through why this kettle is a symptom of my problem. We'll make a handle for this kettle and solve its problem, but I doubt we'll solve my problem. This whole thing starts with a story. I got this kettle from a friend around 10 years ago. The handle had broken partially on it, and they had bought a new one. He asked if I wanted it. I said, yes, of course. Quite quickly, as you can probably guess, this handle broke completely. No problem, I thought. I'll just buy a new handle. Well, that didn't work out. At the time, we couldn't afford a nice kettle like this, so we, mostly I, used this kettle for the next 15 years without a handle. I think it works pretty flawlessly. To get started on a replacement, what I'm doing here is scribing the outline of the kettle. I can then cut on this line and make sure that it fits exactly to the sides of the kettle, along with all the mounting points. Eventually, as you can probably guess, my wife's patience wore out. Well, not so much wore out as we got a kettle as a present. We tried it out, but from an aesthetics perspective, it just didn't work. Now, this gets into my problem. And I need to admit to my problems to become a better person. I don't like buying things. Like, at all. This is something that people find unfathomable. I detest shopping for cars, houses, electronics, and especially clothes. I am that person that thinks that things should be built well enough that they last and should be able to be fixed. Because who needs to buy a new kettle every 20 years? After using the kettle with a handle for a few days, I thought, this is nice. This made me think that I should really replace the handle on the kettle. Now, being 25 years later, I thought, maybe that company that produces this kettle has gotten with the times and sells parts in this part of the world. Nope. Shocking, I know. So now that we're this deep, you can probably guess what I'm doing here, right? If I can't buy a new handle, I need to save this 30-year-old kettle that I love. Now, when I say love, you can interpret that as, it does a good job and I see no reason to replace it, because with all the problems that I do have, loving kettles is not one of them. Anyway, I digress. Before my problem gets the label of toxic, because it's close in this instance, after trying out a 100% functional kettle instead of 99% functional kettle, both my wife and I looked at new kettles that we liked. Because we have expensive taste and love Walnut, independently, we came to the same conclusion. This was the only kettle on planet Earth that we both liked. Both of us also agreed that it was absurdly expensive. At least we agreed. Now that we know how we got here, I'm laying out the handle on some scrap walnut I just happened to have laying around. But this whole process plays perfectly into two of my other traits. I like making and building things, and I like having custom things. Neither of these I feel are problems, because they very nicely go hand in hand, and are lighter on my pocketbook than having custom tastes, but no skill or desire to do it myself. It's pretty simple to cut this on my mini bandsaw. Why aren't I using my large industrial bandsaw? It's covered in garbage, shoved in a corner, and I'd have to change the blade that's on it to cleanly do these cuts. And this one works fine. The visualization I had in my head and laid out on paper is coming together nicely. Once this is done, I'll have the kettle that I quote-unquote love, and it will be custom. I think this project is a win-win for everyone. To cut an inside 90-degree corner like these, I have to nibble away a space for the blade so that it can turn to make the next cut. Using a bandsaw is one of the most satisfying experiences for me as a woodworker. Something about the sound of it is soothing to me, and it's quite fun to use. I had to cut through the outsides of the handle in order to cut inside here. I could have done this with a router bit and template, but that would have required a lot of cleanup to get the square inside corners I wanted. Frankly, working Matt didn't think of it. Editing Matt did. Maybe next time. With this method, I needed to fill in the saw cut line. There are pluses and minuses to everything. To fill that gap, I cut a thin piece. A bit of glue and a quick clamp makes it almost invisible. The other way with the router may have been better to make this piece, but it's just a handle for an old kettle. It doesn't have to be flawless. Now, as I sand my blade marks out of this piece in preparation for shaping, let's talk about my problem some more. Looking back, I think I've always had this problem. The cars I idolized growing up were vintage, and when I got a car of my own, I also kept and used that daily for 15 years before upgrading. I personally rebuilt the motor, replaced the transmission twice, and welded in a new floor pan. It was mine, and I loved it. Flaws and all. I said earlier that using the bandsaw was one of the things I found most satisfying about woodworking. This is the least satisfying for me. I detest sanding. I know it makes things nice, and in the end, it's necessary, so I do it. Begrudgingly and poorly. I'm laying out the markings to cut the recesses for where the handle mounts at the bottom of the kettle. I could hand chop this so that it's nice and rectangular, like the nuts on the kettle, but a Forstner bit works just fine and gives me a nice flat bottom. I have test fit this a few times throughout this process to make sure I wasn't doing anything too terribly stupid, and things are looking really good. Since the kettle is round and the edge of the handle is currently flat, I'm sanding a relief in the middle to help it fit a little bit closer. I'm not going to go crazy for this step, but wanted it a bit tighter. It does make quite a difference to the fit. Finally, I did need to take out my chisels to relieve some of the wood since the kettle mounts hit here. I'm going to be using a 3/8 inch roundover bit that should do a good job of blending all of these parts of the handle into something a little bit more elegant and less stout. For some reason I had lost the inserts that I made for this table and had to improvise since this piece is so small. This is one of those steps that makes the most difference in this process. I know that 99% of people would have just thrown this kettle out long ago, and the other 0.9% would have gotten rid of it once they realized its flaws. They certainly wouldn't put this level of effort into something that probably will die at any point, because, let's face it, modern appliances that use electricity don't exactly last. Perhaps that 99.9% is right. It would be the sane thing to do, but I'm too deep into this now, and I think it's going to look great. I felt that the handle was missing something design-wise, so I clipped the bottom corner to match it to the nubbin on the top. Since router bits don't cut into square corners, quite a bit of work with a rasp, which is pretty much a steel nail file with little teeth, was required. Actually, as rasps go, this is a very fine rasp. I prefer rasps to sandpaper in this circumstance because I can really control what it's removing. Now all the shaping is complete, we are back to hand sanding. It does make it look good, but I still hate it. The final pieces of machining I need to do are drilling a hole for the mount insert and a hole for the bottom screw. I need to drill a matching hole in the kettle too because I didn't want to use their mounting system. It's too wide, so I opted to use a single bolt instead, screwed in from the inside. I do have to be a bit careful how deep I drill, but there's lots of space here. A bit of tape on the drill bit is an easy way to identify where to stop. The bottom mount hole is drilled through both the inside and outside parts of the handle. This is so that I can use a screwdriver through the outside of the handle to tighten it, rather than fighting with the screwdriver at an odd angle and never really getting it tight. Now that all the shaping and sanding is done, I just need to add the hardware. Some 5-minute epoxy on this threaded insert will ensure that the handle doesn't detach. With that done, it's time for finishing. The reason that I love walnut so much is right here. I just love the color of it. It really is my favorite wood and has been since I started woodworking 25 years ago. Once this dries, we are wrapping up with this project. I think it turned out really well for a quick project. So, since this is an old kettle, I felt I should give it a good cleanup so that it can look its best for the final beauty shots. A quick scrub should take off all this. While we wait, let's see what could have been. Everyone told me I was crazy. This is an old kettle and could die at any point. There was no point in saving it. Get a new one. I guess they were right. I do still love this kettle, even more so now that just a little bit of my creativity is in it. There's something special about putting yourself into a project, and I really enjoyed doing it, even if I won't be able to use it. But I guess the kettle has had its time. I love my new kettle. And someday, if it lasts, I'll probably just relive this whole experience again. Because I have this problem. And I need to admit to my problems to become a better person. See you on the next one.